This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. For this episode, we're speaking to Wim Zwijnenburg. He's a researcher, run things, all sorts of stuff at Pax for Peace. He's a really good guy, his work is excellent, and today he's going to be speaking to us about the rise of drone warfare and the way that governments all over the world are making it easier to kill people from the skies and how that is affecting war, diplomacy, all sorts. It's a really interesting episode. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please consider supporting us on the Patreon. We are 100% grassroots, no bullshit here. Support us at patreon.com/popularfront. You got this new report out, right, which from what I can tell, from what I've read of it, it's basically arguing that like drone warfare is kind of going out of control, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we've been trying to understand how the rise of drone production and proliferation is changing warfare. So we've been working on this at PAX for the last 10 years. Like we started off in 2010, like exploring sort of the field of drone technology. Back then, swarms were already being discussed, artificial intelligence, etc. So then sort of, took off with the drone killings program under Obama since 2008. And since, all of these organizations who have since then started working on it, like human rights organizations in the West, but also from Pakistan and from Yemen, have been saying like, okay, this is, it's a new type of warfare which has longer term implications. So we've seen that what's happening in Syria and in Iraq, and of course Libya earlier this year, where there's a massive surge of drone use by all actors. And what we're trying to understand was with this report, like, okay, but how is it changing warfare? And to order to understand that, we took two case studies. We looked at Yemen and we looked at Donbass in eastern Ukraine, and trying to see, okay, who is using drones? Where are these drones coming from? How are they being used, and how has it changed sort of military tactics and strategies? In so far, we could tell from doing this work remotely and trying to gather collection from news articles, from like social media platforms where you see all these kind of videos, and so. And that was kind of interesting to see, because it's important to tell, like, okay, how is this going to reflect in other conflicts? Because having access to cheap, lethal technology that can hit your enemy over a long distance, being able to, continuously surveil your targets, to help adjusting artillery or other kinds of weapons to find the targets by guiding it, because you have basically all these flying cameras. Potentially also with munitions in the sky, that's definitely gonna have an impact on warfare. And I think the reason why we did this was to also, to understand like what kind of restrictions, what kind of discussion do we need to make sure this stuff doesn't end up in the wrong hands, how to discuss rules of engagement, or how to discuss like what kind of restrictions we should set on drone sales, because a lot of these drones are dual use, so that means that they are built out of civilian components, but then being weaponized with military parts. And this also has implications both on the battlefield, but also for like domestic purposes when it comes to giving armed groups or potentially terrorists access to technology where they can hit a target which they couldn't reach before with other means. So I think that's the main thrust behind the report, just to understand these developments in the field. So that's basically we sort of try to look at these different components, but we can maybe talk about it a bit later as well. Well, we talk about the whole range of drones. So of course, like the whole drone warfare took off with the larger military type of drones, the size of an F-16, which can carry payloads like missiles and bombs. But also smaller types of drones and also commercial drones, because that has been very helpful. So take, for example, the situation in eastern Ukraine where Russian-backed separatists and the Ukrainian army supported with these paramilitary volunteer brigades. In the beginning of the conflict in 2000, when the civil war erupted, um, the Ukrainian army like hardly had any like drones. They had these old Soviet Tupolev massive slow kind of machines, which were basically I'm not even sure if they were able to fly. And then you had on the other side the Russia providing technology to the separatists and also engaging themselves with their own drone technology, mostly based on Israeli platforms. But it gave them quite an advantage because they could locate where troop movements were of the Ukrainian army. They could guide artillery, and then later on, they could also weaponize them if they wanted to. So the Ukrainians they had nothing. So they started importing some commercial drones from Canada, from the US. But the volunteer brigades, there were a lot of engineers, young engineers who wanted to help out, and they started building their own drones. So and also this sort of gave rise to this whole drone industry in Ukraine, where they built all these smaller types of commercial, but not commercial, but it's definitely military skill at the moment. Kamikaze drones, and which is now also they're also looking for an export market. But it definitely changed the warfare, and it means if you're being spotted, or there's because with satellites are limited because it's cloudy, in particular in this side of the world. It's not like the Middle East where most of the time you have good satellite access. But this is an area which is cloudy, so you need lower flying machines, and airplanes are of course very expensive. So if you want to locate your enemy and target your artillery or your mortars, then this is very helpful to have. So this definitely gave a boost to both sides of the party, and made it of the war, and it made it sort of a factor for how you set up your camouflage systems, where do you hide your weapon systems. Then, of course, after the OCZ, the Organization for Security in Europe, was starting to sort of control the Minsk agreements between the separatists and the Ukrainian army. They also used drones to monitor the peace agreements to make sure there wasn't particular kind of heavy weapons present in the area, which also resulted in sort of counter reaction by the Russians, counter drone warfare with electronic jamming systems and trying to shoot them down with rifles or other anti-aircraft weapons, which also we saw later on in Syria, which has been very helpful for the Russians to develop their air defenses and counter drone defenses against Syrian rebels. So this whole dynamic comes into play, which is super fascinating. It's okay, how the technology, in particular in this area, people refer to it as sometimes to this kind of drones to UN drones. The cameras are coming from Japan, the gyroscopes are coming from Germany, the payloads coming from China. The 3D bombs are being manufactured with or the bomblets are manufactured with 3D printers. So it's being assembled there, and it definitely, if you do it in the right way, and this is it gives an enormous military advantage. And this is just the first stage, so it's very rudimentary, but you see this professionalization taking place. And it's also really important to look at the other conflicts where states are basically supporting armed groups with technology, with engineering expertise, with materials. So Yemen would be then a good example. We can perhaps dive in a little bit later. But so basically we're looking at the whole range of technology that's reshaping conflict at the moment.
Right. And in terms of big kind of commercial, or not commercial, big military drones, the kind we're seeing in Nagorno-Karabakh in Armenia right now, of course Azerbaijan, the types we see Israel selling all over the place. Who is at the forefront of drone technology right now in that sense, would you say?
Well, yeah, I think you named them already. I think Israel, when it comes, is a major provider to all kinds of platforms, but China is a major exporter. So we see Chinese drones popping up all over the world, in Africa, in Asia, in the Central Asia, Southern Asia, in the Middle East. The US definitely wants to be in here, so most of the European countries are using US military drones, smaller ones, and I think at the moment there are like 10 countries in this drone Reaper user group, which has the US MQ-9 Reaper. It's an armed, larger drone, and the US, but the US has to deal with restrictions. So there is the Missile Technology Control Regime, which is this arms control export agreement to prevent that states can technology capable of carrying weapons of mass destruction is being exported to unwanted end users. And UAVs are part of that control agreement because it's a means to deliver weapons of mass destruction like nuclear, biological, chemical weapons. So because there is no control regime for drones back when this was developed, because there weren't any drones back then, in the sense that we have drones right now. So that's the only sort of that put limitations on the U.S. to export their Reapers and their Predators. But now Trump wants to get rid of that because he wants to have the competition with China. And in the meantime, that was kind of an interesting development. You see all those states who were thinking like, oh, that's the drone market that's a booming business. We want in on that. So they started developing all these kind of drones, like smaller types of drones that are not dependent on satellite communication. So for example, if you buy a US Reaper drone, you also buy like the maintenance, you buy the satellite data link, so which is all US owned. So you don't want to be dependent of that, well, unless you're like a NATO ally. And the same with Chinese drones. If you use a Chinese drone, which is also satellite controlled, you have to use the Chinese satellite system. So that means also China knows what you're doing, what you're up to. So these new kind of, so the other kind of states were like Ukraine, South Africa, Turkey. They were developing these drones that can fly beyond line of sight, but it doesn't need a satellite control system. So you can train your pilots to navigate the drones without being dependent on someone else's navigation systems. And now the Turks have their own satellite as well. So that, but the plus side is you're not dependent on it. The downside is that your drones can't fly that far. So the Turkish TB2s Bayraktar, which are flying over Libya and Idlib in northwest Syria and over Nagorno-Karabakh, like they have like a maximum flight radius of 150 kilometers, which is very limiting in terms of operations. But most countries are not interested in doing, carrying out large-scale killing operations at the other end of the world. So for many of them, this is sufficient if you don't want to do cross-border operations. But so that's the kind of that's a market that is interesting for producing states. Same with Iran, for example, as well. Like Iranian drones also are not relying on, most of them are not relying on satellite controls, but beyond line of sight, or they're being programmed to fly long distances, like we've seen in Yemen. So that's so you have China, Iran to certain countries, because they're very limited, of course. The US and Israel, but you have to keep your eyes open to what Taiwan is producing, what Belarus is producing, South Africa, and Pakistan, Turkey, of course, they're a major player at the moment. Because that's also one of the things why you see so many footage online. It's basically, it's of Turkish drones targeting Armenian troops in Nagorno-Karabakh, because it's for sales. It's a combat-proven stamp you can put on your package, and it's very interesting. You see already the sales going up of Turkish TB2 drones all over the place. So, but we also have to look like what comes after that. So like the question now is like, who's going to make the AK-47 of the drone? A simple, effective, easy to produce, easy to maintain and use drone that you can deploy anywhere where you want. And I think that's the question at the moment. And now that's a market that we're looking at, the loitering munitions, which Israel, Ukraine, Turkey has also a couple of loitering munitions as well, the US as well, but less keen on exporting it. But that's an interesting market because that brings also other kinds of security risks with it as well. If you're gonna able to produce an effective suicide drone, that's easy to produce because then you can only think the worst, like if armed groups or terrorists getting access to military grade suicide drones, it's a major security risk.
Right, like when the AK is kind of the gold standard for just a resilient firearm in the war, you're saying that it could get to the point where there is a gold standard for a quick, easy, resilient suicide drone essentially in the war. And we're not talking about putting a mortar round on a DJI. You mean like an actual weaponized drone?
Yeah, like the DJI is, it's like the first step. It's crude, but like
Right.
the pace of technological developments is going so fast that, in particular, if you bring in good expertise, that we see it in Ukraine. I think Ukraine is a prime example where they started off with DJIs, and now they have those kind of suicide drones basically built from domestic drone industry, from just a couple of enthusiastic, nationalistic folks who've now built a whole own drone industry and is now ready to enter the world market. And the same happening in China as well. You don't need the chips you need for these kind of weapons are every smartphone has a really capable chip that can do everything you want to do. So and that's the risk at the moment we're facing. In a lot of countries, if you look at military expos, what's being produced, what the military, what the defense industry is putting up, and what kind of commercials they're setting out, it's definitely that's the market where we're going to. And yeah, it's easy and accessible, like it will change the whole perception of air defenses, of security systems, of security parameters. Take the green zone, for example. You see the Iraqis Iraqi militias are trying to hit the U.S. green zone with Katusha, or not Katusha even. It's just like Iranian produced missiles. Fairly crude, can't hit a thing, mostly miss. Imagine if they have access to cheap hundreds of those kind of drones, which are very precisely capable of hitting the U.S. embassy. That's a complete change of the security setup, because the U.S. can now intercept the incoming missiles with their CRAM, which is like this massive cannon which can fire 1,000 bullets per minute to intercept those kind of missiles. If you have 100 drones coming your way at the same time, good luck with that. And that's and also in already on the battlefield, this is changing the way you have to pay attention to what's coming at you. Like even in Mosul, we saw this where both the Peshmerga, the Iraqi counterterrorism teams, but also the U.S. coalition forces who were present there, when ISIS, had access to DJIs with explosives, they already were struggling because you didn't anticipate that. So you have to pay attention what's happening, not only what's happening in front of you, but also what is above you. So we can only imagine. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to see what's happening if that professionalizes and that kind of technology gets in, is easy to produce and easy to export. And that's what you also see in nagorno-karabakh. Like a lot of those Israeli Harpy and Harop drones are, you can launch them with relatively ease, and being, I think an average launcher has, I think, 20 and 24 of those, or 16 of those drones in a launcher, and they're fairly small, easy to transport, and you can hit a massive amount of targets in a very short time with a lot of precision. So, and that's the change drones will bring to the battleground.
And in terms of what we've just been talking about, a kind of gold standard of like easy to deploy drone, have you seen any evidence that there is one of them on its way? Like surely one country must be ready to go with that.
Yeah, so Turkey has a bunch of them. They are now going to deploy them as well. There's the Kargu, which looks like a sort of a weaponized version of a DJI drone. But I also seen recently other examples of Turkish drones where they're keen to mass produce them and launch them. So there's the it's called Alpago, which is it looks a bit like it's a tube launcher. So you can use basically a large tube with a flying drone in it. I'm not sure what the exact. I have to look up the specifications.
Like a mortar that fires a drone.
Yeah, it's basically a flying hand grenade. Yeah, it's very cheap. You can just carry it around in your backpack, a couple of them. Israel has the Mini Harpy. Poland is now producing the Warmate, which is the same as the the Turkish Alpago. The most famous one is, of course, the US Switchblade, which is used by US Special Forces, shown up already in Syria and in Afghanistan. Those are the other examples I just gave you. The Polish Warmate showed up already in Libya. We're still not sure how they got there, and clearly it's a violation of the arms embargo. Ukraine has something called a Silent Thunder, which is a sort of similar kind of kamikaze drone. And the RAM UAV, also a kamikaze-style munition. And that's the kind of, those are the markets that are now eyeing for a piece of the pie when it comes to cheap but very precise drones to be used in these kind of conflicts. It's very tempting to acquire them, and it's super useful. The payload is, of course, not so heavy, but you just need to hit the right kind of target with it to be effective.
Yeah, and also instills terror. There's nothing worse. I mean, I've never actually been in an environment where an armed drone has been near me, like when I'm reporting on the front or whatever, but I have been around mortars, and just that feeling of just something is coming from the air and you don't really know where it's coming from, it's fucking terrifying. Like, everyone is scared, and I've seen lots of footage of people terrified of drones. And when you're watching them videos, specifically right now in Nagorno-Karabakh, where you're just seeing like groups of soldiers sitting around, no idea what's going on, boom, gone, like everyone's gone. Do you know what I mean? It's a very new frontier, I think. Maybe that's naive, but to me it doesn't feel like, it feels quite new still. Do you know what I mean?
No, definitely. And then there's the difference, of course. It works two ways. So, and you've seen probably the same videos as I have, but either you can make a lot of noise to scare people. So those kind of the Israeli, the harpies and the harps, like they hear the buzzing sound flying over, and it scares soldiers already because they know next time they know where it's coming from, and you hear the sound above you, and it's also the same sort of effect that the US drones had in their target killing campaign over Yemen and Pakistan, where people were hearing this noise 24 hours a day, and you don't know when a missile is going to hit you because you don't know if the guy sitting next to you, is a suspected terrorist or not, that the US deemed that they are entitled to kill and kill you along with it. And so civilian populations were scared shitless the whole time because of these drone strikes taking place. And the other side is, what you mentioned. If you don't know what's happening, you don't hear anything, because there are also quieter ones, like the Israeli Orbiter 1K is being used by Azerbaijan as well. And it's also, I think, death coming out of nothing is like the worst thing if you're in a soldier, because if you're in a ditch somewhere or in a trench, and usually with artillery, etc., you can hear it. You can hear it sort of, it's being fired. You can hear the explosions. You can sort of anticipate hiding. But precise drones, they just need to spot you, and you can drop this. The drone can drop on you immediately from like vertical, but like horizontal, just flying at the target. But you can see in the promotion videos of the harpies by the Israelis, they're really saying, well, we can, also come from above. You don't look straight up. Maybe you scan the horizon, but this thing is coming from straight up from above you. Like you don't see it coming, and that's also the threat, I guess, for soldiers, which is changing, definitely changing warfare. But at the same time, also with the long distance drones, that was sort of interesting in the Yemen case, where these drones were, assembled by the Houthis, very likely with Iranian support. But these kind of drones, like you could buy this stuff that was where they were built with on Alibaba.com, like the diesel engines that could carry these drones for over like 1,500 kilometers, and the Houthis were able to target Saudi oil fields, Saudi airports, water desalination plants on the coast. The Saudis had to set up all kind of expensive air defenses because of those cheap kind of drones, which you could assemble for like $1,500. But with material fine online, it can strike terror like hundreds to over 1,000 kilometers away. And this is like a new type of warfare where all of a sudden, it's being brought home by Saudi by the Houthis to the Saudi Arabia's population, and that's kind of if they're able to fly low, they can avoid the radar detection, which we saw in with the Iranian strike with Houthis and cruise missiles in Saudi Arabia in September 2019. And that's risky business, and that's also we're trying to see, okay, how this changing perception of warfare if everyone can have access to very, very high precision munitions.
Yeah, it in some ways it really evens the playing field, for want of a better term. But in others, if you don't have the military, like spending kind of military might goes out the window. Do you know what I mean? Like Armenian fighters, they're fighting hard, whatever, as are the Azerbaijanis. But the Azerbaijanis have the drones, the massive capacity of drones, which for them it's just helping them. Do you know what I mean? It's really, we're seeing so many Armenian soldiers killed. There's no denying it, it's happening, and really a lot of it is coming from the drones. So it's a funny one, you know what I mean? It kind of levels it and it kind of doesn't, depending on, I guess, how they're being used.
Well, yeah, it's like in this case of it's also, I guess, what your strategic objective is. So I think the time will tell what's happening in Nagorno-Karabakh, but they're able to take out a lot of the Armenian, the Azerbaijanis, or I guess probably also Turks are also, the Turkish army is probably also still supporting that with either personnel in those operations. The question is also like, if it's not, you can take out all these systems and people, but on the ground we don't see any significant change in terms of did you actually able to conquer territory or hold territory. So there's definitely, there's power politics at play there. So it's a kind of force projection by states with drones, but also non-state actors, like we've seen with the Houthis in Yemen, to show, like, listen, we can take out everything we want if you want to, and so it also, it can help you on the negotiation table, for example. I think definitely that's what happened with the Houthis, and potentially also. And I'm not an expert on the region, so I can't say much about the Nagorno-Karabakh situation. But like, I can no doubt. But also looking at are they actually able to conquer territory, which was not a lot so far, the Azerbaijanis. So potentially it's also a tool to it's a force projection on this is what we are capable of. And that's we're seeing that as well in Libya, where there's also a massive use of drones, and also with the the case of the Turkish army striking all the Syrian forces in Idlib and earlier this year. Just like, this is what we can do, so you better stand back, or that's an instrument as well. So that's kind of the relevance of looking at those kind of patterns of drone use, and people are anticipating as well. So non-state actors are seeing the advantages of having drones, as I mentioned with the Houthis, but also other groups in Yemen, non-state armed groups are looking into that. But also, like, Libya, we see the same, and that's interesting in terms of tactics and strategy. Was a change perception of risk? Would, for example, in Nagorno-Karabakh, would Azerbaijan have done the same with crewed aircraft, with jet fighters or helicopters? I doubt it. So, but the fact they had drones and had this capability made them go to war with Armenia. But without it, we wouldn't have seen this massive use of lethal force in this area. So that's already a change that drones are currently having on regional security and on threat perception. So that's good also to make that link also with how we and that's why the work what we're doing at the moment is engaging with states. Like, listen, this could easily escalate in something worse if you get a wrong reaction. And so far, we've been on the edge a couple of times. For example, last year when or was it this year? That was last year when the US RQ-4 Global Hawk, is a massive, big $100 million plane, was shut down by Iran. It escalated tensions between the US and Iran, of course, but if that was a manned aircraft, we would have seen a different reaction. But Iran thought it could pull this off because it was a drone. But depending, I guess, on the mood of Trump or how he felt that day, or that could lead to different kind of retaliations and change the dynamic of conflicts.
That's a really good point, actually. Specifically what you said about, like, I mean, again, using Nagorno-Karabakh as an example, just because it's happening right now. But like you said, they're using the drones, like they're winning on that sense, but they're only winning in terms of the amount of soldiers killed, which is not really winning a war. You know what I mean? You're right, actually. I was reading today that Azerbaijan have actually not really taken that much ground at all. So you're right, definitely there. And yeah, that brings up another good point. Like, it almost, I don't know, it like for someone like Iran or America or whatever, they can almost save face by shooting down a drone, right? If you shoot down a jet, you're in fucking trouble. You've killed a pilot, and that's a way bigger deal, right? If you shoot down a drone, you can kind of say, hey, we shot down the American drone or whatever. But actually, they've lost some hardware, but it's not the same as, a whole family losing somebody or whatever. There's no face to go in the paper. Do you know what I mean? I didn't really think of it like that. It's quite interesting.
Well, it's also because it's relevant because, if you shoot down a plane and a pilot is lost or being captured, you're also forced by your own audience, by your own voters to react. In the case of the U.S., suppose there was a manned aircraft, and in the U.S., even if the pilot wasn't killed but ejected and was caught by the Iranians, the U.S. would have forced their hand to do something because don't want to lose face. Whereas, like you said, with a drone, it's like, okay, you lost a lot of equipment, but that's it. But at the same time, it all depends on what kind of reaction you have. And drones don't. You can't hold ground with drones. So if you don't combine it with air or with land forces or with a military footprint on the ground, then it's you can use it as a sort of control the air and control the movements of your forces. But it also comes with limitations if you're not doing something else. So that's, for example, the U.S. Drone campaign in Pakistan and Yemen. People disagree with this assessment, but did it actually defeat Al Qaeda and the Taliban? The drone war started in 2004 with the first drone strike, 2002 actually in Yemen, but later on it escalated under Obama in 2008 until 2012. But did it help beat Al Qaeda or the Taliban? Like, no. I mean,
no.
No, not the Taliban at least. Maybe with Al Qaeda, it had like, the people were on the run, but like you in the end, it was just a desperate measure because they didn't have any other tools or didn't want to invest in any other tools. But it didn't. You can't kill terrorism by killing a terrorist only, and that's the limitations of drones. But it's being sold as this sort of risk-free technology, which is cheap and it's going to solve all your problems. Some kind of it's kind of silver bullet for complex problems. But real life is more complicated than killing people that are in your way, and that's the same we see, I guess, also in nagorno-karabakh. You can blow them up, but what's next? And the same with it's sending a message. That's for sure. Also in Idlib with the Turkish campaign, it can be very effective. And but it's also that's kind of interesting. I would be fascinated to learn more about, like how. I mean, other states are paying attention to this, of course, as well. It's like, okay, so these, the Turkish drones are definitely being used in, and there's probably a lot of electronic warfare play as well that's jamming the Armenian systems so they don't see the drones coming. So how is the next war where these are being used. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a system popping up that's able to take out these drones. I can guarantee you that like a lot of people in the defense industry are looking at this and like, oh, that's going to be a challenge for other potential customers or whatever. So we need to find a way to take out these kind of drone systems. So you saw it also with the ISIS drones. The commercial DJI, they were being used, and all of a sudden, like a couple of years later, all these fancy guns, handheld guns, were showing up in battlefields, like the sci-fi looking weapons to jam the signals from those drones, etc. Because it became a threat, and that's probably the same we'll see with larger type of drone warfare. Actually, it was already happening in Yemen, where the Houthis were like shooting down Chinese Wing-Lungs, like these big armed drones, and the U.S. Reaper drones with surface to air missiles. A couple of them were shot down over Yemen. Unless because they don't have an air force, if you have an air force, it's very easy to relatively easy to shoot them down because they're slow and vulnerable. But if you don't control the airspace, you might have to look at other options to counter the drone threats, and that's probably something states who are active in those kind of regions and non-state armed groups will be definitely looking into.
Yeah, definitely. It's a weird new world of warfare, man. I want to speak specifically about certain types of drones, specifically ones that we're seeing in the news recently. Maybe you can kind of explain what they are. So, first of all, we're hearing a lot about the loitering drone or the loitering munition. Israel has been sending over to Azerbaijan. Some people calling it a suicide drone. Like, what is that? How does it work?
Yeah, so basically, yeah, what you mentioned, it's a suicide drone, and at the moment they come all shapes and sizes. So you have very small ones that are based like you can put them in a tube and carry them around. They're launched by a soldier on the ground who just places the tube on, launches the drone, and with a handheld device the size of a smartphone, there's a camera from the drone. There's a payload, usually around 1 kilo to some bigger payloads depending how big the drone is. But like those small handheld ones has like between 1 and 2 kilo payload. And then the soldier can guide the drone to its target. So basically, it's a big flying grenade, but he can be very precise. It can fly over a long distance. Like for example, the one I was just talking about, the Warmate, the one from Poland. It can fly for half an hour. We don't know exactly what the range is, or the US Switchblade has a range of 5 kilometers. So basically, you have a drone which is the Switchblade is, for example, is 40 millimeters grenade. So it's like a fairly big, good explosion you can get with that. You can fly it 5 kilometers far away. There's a camera link between your handheld phone, and you can just drop it from all the way straight up from above down on your target. It doesn't see you coming. And those are sort of so you can fly around. You can when you deem your opportunity is fit, you can just drop it on the target. So those are the kind of things which are you don't want to have those kind of drones end up in the wrong hands, because definitely it's the ability to give armed groups or individuals that capability it's very easy to misuse, and it's very easy to handle. And then the systems are going up. So then you have like a larger type of drone. So for example, the Israeli Harpy is a smaller type of drone which can fly over there's the Hyrope, which is it looks like how to describe it? That's sort of hard on podcasts to describe it. It's sort of V-shaped system. The Harop can fly for 6 hours, has a range of 1,000 kilometers. It's being launched from a truck. You can put several of those drones in a truck. When it launches, the wings come out, and then it can fly around. It has a warhead of 23 kilograms. So it's very effective. You can launch dozens of them at the same time. So it's easy to overwhelm enemy defenses. And the reason I personally still keep calling them drones is because it's based on the same technology, or the same technology being used as is in a drone. And it's also relevant to keep the drone in here, or because that also links with the opportunities to address these concerns over their export in arms export control regimes. If there's still if drone technology is involved, it gives you more opportunities to if someone wants to buy them, to make it part of a risk assessment, to say, can we sell these drones to this country or not? So it's and that's, I think, the future we're looking at as well, is the ability to launch dozens or hundreds of them at the same time, overwhelm enemy air defenses if you have to carry out a large attack, but also to communicate with each other. So the US, for example, is experimenting with kind of smaller types of drones that can fly in swarms, and they can launch thousands of them at the same time,
like little miniature ones.
Exactly. Wow. And they communicate with each other and form a pattern, etc.
And they're using them for war?
Yeah. Those are like the DARPA had this. They published a video about this, I think, a year and a half ago, where an F-18 was dropping a couple of those, which are basically smaller. I think that's sort of interesting also for the discussion on arms export control, but also on arms use, because basically they're cluster munitions in some sense. They're very smart cluster munitions, which already are constrained by international humanitarian law on how they can be used. There's a ban on cluster munition use. Unfortunately, the US isn't signed up to that, but because a lot of them don't explode on impact. If you have, even with normal grenades, not everything explodes. So if you're going to use 1,000 mini drones with explosives and you're going to launch them at a target, not all of them explode. So you still have lots of loitering or leftover munitions in the ground, which can easily be picked up by people and explode again. So that question sort of comes back there as well. So, but going back to your question, sorry. So we've now seen dozens of different types of those kind of loitering munitions or suicide drones being developed from countries all over the world. I think Israel is the most important producer and investor in those kind of loitering munitions / kamikaze drones, and then followed by Turkey, US, and Poland. But I'm pretty sure we'll see others catching up as well when it comes to those kind of munitions, and China to some extent too, but they haven't been exporting them a lot so far. I haven't seen them actually being used in conflicts, but they did develop a couple of models and have been promoting them on military exhibitions. But yeah, that's sort of the playing field at the moment when it comes to these type of munitions. But it's also it's the cheap technology is making all these kind of futuristic wars or weapon systems attractive for customers all over the world.
I mean, you can bet those China ones are coming as well. What about this the US Ninja drone, as it's sometimes called, the one where it kind of flies out the air and just slices guys up? They used one recently to kill a jihadist near Idlib, and it just went through the top of his car, sliced him to bits. He was splattered, and everyone else was fine, really. Like, there was no civilian casualties, there was no huge explosion. Those to me are just like, wow. Like, it's I mean, it's scary, it's horrible, but it's really like futuristic. How do they work?
Yeah, so that's basically just a missile. So it's fired by a drone, but it's a missile with blades inside the missile itself. So it doesn't have an explosive warhead. It just has the blades. It just has like something heavy in front of the grenade, in front of the missile, which is a Hellfire missile, which are usually in the past been used by drones for target killings. And exactly because of concerns over civilian casualties in counterterrorism operations, in particular in the US, of course, they got a lot of pushback on the massive death rate among civilians in their in their drone campaigns in Yemen and Somalia and Pakistan. They're sort of forced to think about, okay, if we still want to get support for our operations, but we don't want to kill civilians. Like, what else can we do that absolutely guarantees that the person we hit is killed? So the blades, sort of this ninja missile was designed to work like that. So because the blades popping up just a couple of seconds before impact, it means the what's the word for it, the radius of impact becomes bigger, but not big enough to cause civilian casualties. Suppose someone is like 5 meters away from the car with an explosive missile, that person could potentially be killed as well. With this missile, it would be unharmed. And a lot of those terrorists or suspected terrorists or militants are hiding among the civilian population in Idlib. So the US has to be more careful with their operations than they had to be on a normal battlefield, because they're basically not in war with Syria, because this is not in the Syrian government controlled area, but they're not in war necessarily with the major armed groups in that area. So they target this specific armed group or which is linked with Al Qaeda, just to take out the leadership there. But they don't want to upset too much the other. If they would hit civilians there, they would lose legitimacy. So I think it's effective what it does in that sense, but it's also gruesome, in particular if you're were unlucky enough to see the photos after the impact, which I couldn't recommend. But
yeah, no, me either. It's certainly unlucky if you're on the receiving end of that as well. Like, Jesus, that's got you. Like, I mean, I'm not being horrible here, but I was like, when I saw the pictures, it's like, Christ, there's no. It's when people say ninja drone, it's because it looks like, I don't know, 6 ninja swords have shot out, like samurai swords have shot out from the thing and just sliced the person up, right? Like, it seems, from what I've seen anyway, just looking at it through research, it looks incredibly precise. Do you know what I mean?
Which I think from a civilian, saving civilian lives in conflict or in this kind of operations is, in that sense, an improvement. I wouldn't say to prevent the civilian casualties. At the other end, it also can lead to some kind of weird justification for states to deploy these kind of means, or to deploy these kind of drones, because they say, well, we can precisely take out this person. But we have to be careful here, because we also noticed in a lot of drone strikes with explosive missiles in Yemen and Pakistan and Somalia, you can precisely kill the wrong person. Or if you don't know why certain persons are being killed, and of course there are a lot of innocent people being killed as well, because the information which the decision was based on to kill the person was wrong, or there was no clear justification for using lethal force against a person. If you're not, so for example, like, the US has been criticized a lot for the drone killings in Yemen and Pakistan and Somalia, because they were not at war with that country, or because and the people who were being killed were like low-level soldiers. They were not necessarily they were not necessarily a threat to the US, because you can only use lethal force outside of a conflict if there's an imminent threat from that person against your country. That's the only justification under international law to kill someone, because like there's no other option to protect yourself by killing that person. Just like the police is not able to use the weapon, at least not in in Europe, but it's like a last resort. And the reason why that is because the state has means of deadly violence in their hand, and we gave up that sort of right to use lethal force ourselves and gave it to the state as in the social contract, but in order to trust the state that it's not going to randomly use it against you. So on the international level, and I know some people have their thoughts about the effectiveness of international law, but it's all we have at the moment to protect ourselves from random state violence. That there are certain legal principles we can trust that they're being upheld. But if states are finding more ways to kill other people without a clear justification outside of a conflict, and they refuse to provide any clarifications or why they did that or why this person was a threat, it's a dangerous development. And even if the US is doing it at the moment, but like, what's if we don't counter that kind of practice? Other states will be using this as well. So we can easily imagine, states flying also with similar kind of drones, which can be very precise but kill people we don't think are a terrorist, because the word terrorist is also used randomly by people if it fits their description. So Turkey, for example, was keen to have Muslim Kobani on the terrorist list and kill him. Well, he's the leader or he's the military commander of the Syrian Democratic Forces fighting against ISIS in northeast Syria.
Bro, I've been charged with terrorism in Turkey, man. Like, what if they send a fucking drone to UK and bomb out my house? Like, no, I'm joking, but I get your point exactly. Like, right, they can just suddenly decide, well, we didn't enter their country, we had a terrorist to take out. And it's all well and good when people say, oh, well, US had taken out Al-Qaeda people, but what if America decides someone else is a terrorist that they don't like anymore, which they've done loads of times? Look at Saddam Hussein. Or like you say, like a more despotic country does it. That raises a lot of worrying issues with diplomacy, with law. Are we seeing any kind of efforts to, I don't know, you would think there needs to be some kind of, I don't know, drone constitution or something. Do you know what I mean? Is there any efforts to do something like that?
Well, this is the kind of work we're trying to push for years, and there have been some successes as well. So, for example, in the US last week, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, has forced the US government's hand to be more open and push back against their program to be more transparent about who they kill and why. In order to protect people's lives, because if there's this journalist who's based in Idlib, he's an Afro-American man who is Abdul Karim, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know him. I mean, I have a very different opinion of him, and a lot of people hate me for it, but I've watched videos of him years and years ago cheering on Al-Qaeda suicide bombers, saying the heroes are off the battle. So, and I also saw him celebrating when women were raped in Afrin, so...
That's despicable if someone does that, but because of that, does that person deserve to be killed with a drone strike?
Exactly, no, because it's free speech essentially. If he's not got involved in violence, you are right.
I don't agree with it either. Like, let me just be clear on that. Like, I think everyone who's cheering for that, but that doesn't justify, at least not for the US, to kill its own citizens, and it can also be a downward spiral towards anyone who doesn't have the same opinion as you have, just to kill that person. If he was actively instigating, violence, still, it's a slippery slope. That's why I'm warning. That's why I'm careful of. I can definitely see all kind of advantages or disadvantages of doing these kind of operations, but we have to be really careful who we give the authority to kill, and that's the whole thing. Coming back to your question, like, yeah, okay, so you can kill that person very precisely without killing civilians. That still doesn't make it always just. Maybe in the case of Idlib, there might be reasons for that, but like I said, like if it's another state who's starting to use this kind of weapons against their opposition groups, then, and we have never spoken out and said something about that, then we're in a whole different position. And now to come back to your question on like something done about it, like that's the sad part. Like, no, like the world has remained silent so far on the US drone killing campaign. There have been some discussions in the UN and has been trying to be erased by various a couple of states in the past, but there's not a big appetite for constraint. People are not willing or able to counter the US with their questionable or drone killing programs, because it's also convenient for some states to let the US carry out the dirty work they're not wanting to do. We actually, on the opposite, we see more states looking to acquire drones, armed drones. France, it's a really interesting case. France has flying Reapers in the Sahel and been carrying out targeted killings since the Reapers got armed. So over the last couple of months, and we don't know who they're targeting. I mean, I I don't see them massively abusing their powers there, but it's still good on principle to be clear how you are using lethal violence in murky operations like those kind of counterinsurgency operations, even though it has some kind of legal justification through a UN resolution or whatever. You still want to know what your state is up to, and in case they make a mistake, you want to be able to hold them accountable for the mistakes they're making. But if that's not possible because we don't know what they're doing with their drones, it's getting more tricky. So the UK is, have been carrying out a couple of target killings with drones. More European states are buying armed drones, and those are the bigger ones. Not the smaller ones, which are more easy to use for target killings or other kind of lethal operations. But so that's why we're trying now there was a UN special rapporteur who brought out this report in June based on the US killing of the Iranian general Soleimani in Iraq, but also addressing the larger problem with like, hey, listen, we have all these new tools and technologies right now, but if you don't be more clear what the limitations are of the use of this can easily escalate and either lead to more innocent civilian lives or lead to more more insecure world because we have all these capabilities. So that's why we've been pushing also for having the discussion or not discussion. We have to work towards something more, some kind of normative regime or states clarifying what the limitations are of drone warfare, and it's the whole scope, like from the smaller type of drones we're just talking in the beginning, but also how technology, what kind of constraints we have to put on using and exporting technology, because it can easily lead to all kinds of detrimental effects for civilians and for security. But that's there at the moment. There's a sort of silence in the international community because everyone's also eyeing for drones, right? They want to have them themselves as well, and they don't want to limit themselves too much in case they have them and they can't use them anymore. So,
God, that is so dark.
yeah, and when they haven't even entered the territory of autonomous or more autonomy in weapon systems. So that's like a next level.
The ones
discussion.
that kind of fly themselves, right?
Yeah, and they can take out the target themselves. Like there's not a human decision anymore. Like it just identifies the target. The computer, in artificial intelligence seeks out the target based on patterns or algorithms, and then decides to engage on the target. That's something that's like next level stuff, which goes beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, because maybe it's more important now also to talk about stuff that's capable to be on the battlefield in the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, artificial intelligence is, there's also a lot of hype about it, and definitely we'll see its use on the battlefield, but it's not going to be fielded anytime, like in the next 5 years at least. But it's more and more creeping into military systems anyway, from targeting to weapon systems at some point. But it's already there in defensive systems. So air defense systems already are using automated responses to incoming missiles, etc.
Yeah. And I we spoke a bit about America there. I don't want to like let them off the hook, if you get what I mean, because I remember reading about Obama, right? Obama was the guy that kind of really ratcheted up the drone killings, and I remember reading that in the end, like, so many civilians ended up dying. Back then, it was more likely, right, that it would kill civilians. I think it killed more civilians than actual, supposed terrorists. Maybe just talk about that, because we have a lot of young listeners who won't know about that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so basically, Obama was actually started under Bush already, but Obama really took pride in it. Actually, was bragging about it also on TV, to some disgust of many, of at least from people in the areas where drones were heavily being used. So they used like these what we call predators and reapers, which are like armed drones flying over areas where the US was not at war with. So the US was not at war with Yemen, the US was not at war with Pakistan, and the US was not at war with Somalia. Still, they were targeting people there. In the beginning, there are a lot of more and more stories coming out where basically the CIA took out certain people because the Pakistani Secret Service didn't like some drug dealer. So in order for Pakistan support to help the US find terrorists, the US had to kill these drug dealers or these drug lords in Pakistan, which is a confirmed story. The drones were being used to strike at funerals of suspected of militants which were killed, and then there would be like double strike at the funeral to make sure they killed other people at that funeral. People in cars were being like civilians in cars were being targeted. Like one story that always stuck with me was from one of our partners in Yemen. It's a human rights organization who did an interview, and they were in a car. So they're driving, and this is a clear example of what's wrong with drone warfare. So they were driving to Yemen, 2 cars. They passed a Yemeni checkpoint from the Yemeni government, which was still in control of that area, and they were driving into the area, sort of, I guess, not anymore in control of the government. And I think it was a couple of 100 meters after that checkpoint, all of a sudden this drone hit this car in front of them, which had this young guy in it. He was I think he was a preacher, who was preaching against Al Qaeda, and he was killed in that drone strike. And before the missile hit the target, people saw the drone flying and they could hear it, and they were like, "Oh, look, maybe we should be." They were laughing, they were joking, maybe we get killed, and bam. And the reason why this is important is because, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, you cannot kill someone outside of a conflict if you don't like that person. So you always have to go through other options before there's no other resort than to use force. In this case, the US could, if they would suspect this guy to be a Al Qaeda terrorist and he deemed to be a risk to the US, they could easily cooperate with the Yemeni government, and they could even send a special forces team to arrest the guy and put him into trial if he was actually a risk. But because they went to a checkpoint from the Yemeni government, he could even be arrested by the Yemeni government themselves and then being apprehended to the US for interrogation if that was the case. But it didn't even happen. They just decided to kill people, and then civilians along the way as well. So there were like hundreds and hundreds of these kind of drone strikes taking place in these areas I've been mentioning, including like many hundreds of civilian, well, thousands actually, I think over 4,000 of drone strikes and hundreds of civilian casualties. But it's so difficult to, it always has been difficult to monitor this because, they're carried out in areas which we don't have a lot of access to because it's very remote. And people who were killed in those drone strikes and they were innocent, like they felt like, okay, we can, where can we complain? Where can we get justice for my father or my mother or my sister or being killed? There's a famous example from Pakistan where a 60-year-old lady was working on the field. Amnesty did a good report about this. Was working there with her grandchildren, and she was blown up by a drone strike. And the shrapnel was still found from the Hellfire missile in that field, so that's why we know it was a drone strike. And we don't even know why they just want to know why we're being targeted, why we're being killed. Like, we done nothing wrong, Maybe you lived next to the wrong person, or you're mistaken for someone. And I think that sort of set a trend to drone warfare. So of course, after all the publications and the field investigations, fortunately there was a big pushback against that, and Obama was in the end forced to be more transparent. But under Trump, this was being because the method why it became more transparent is because all these operations were carried out by the CIA, which means they don't have to provide there's hardly any oversight on what they're doing apart from some members in Congress and the Senate. But the Air Force has to be way more transparent when they use force. And under Obama, it's sort of the drone program was being back put in the Air Force at some point on the JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, who carrying out all the special missions with the SEAL team, etc. But under Trump, it went back under the CIA, so they're still being used in Somalia, and now they want to be likely from Kenya as well in the Sahel. And we don't know again what's happening and what who's being targeted and why, and if there are any civilian casualties or not. So it's also what we learned is that the information coming out of the U.S. government is really unreliable. It's because of organizations like Amnesty, because of the work funded by Open Society foundations on the justice program to support victims who want to get reparations and justice. And they've been, like a lot of lawyers have been involved to get information on the table from the U.S. government on why the people who they represent are being targeted. But it's been painstaking work that has cost a lot of time. And yeah, if you look at the reality of the field, like I mentioned, it's easy to get cynical about it, but like, did the drone program, did it beat Al-Qaeda or did it beat the Taliban? Like, it put Al-Qaeda to some extent into hiding, but yeah, it's sort of a whack-a-mole game. If you hit someone here and then somewhere else it pops up again. So
no, I agree, man, and I think it's okay to be cynical about it. Like, I'm really tired of this idea that you not really have to have any emotional feelings within like war and conflict and that. Like, it's one of the places where you need that, otherwise this sort of stuff happens where people are just like, well, they got droned, it doesn't matter. Like, no, it does matter. These are people's lives, you know what I mean? I don't know, it bothers me. There's something else that's weird as well. I was reading a report that so people specifically in the US, this is what I was reading, but it was saying that drone operators, thousands of miles away operating the drones, were actually getting worse PTSD, or at least it seemed from this study, than some of the actual frontline soldiers who'd witnessed the fighting up close. I just found that so weird, you know what I mean? I don't know why, but I don't think they know why yet, but it was just such a strange situation, like it's kind of fucking everybody up, do you know what I mean?
yeah, and that's something, they're easily replaceable as well, because I've talked to some of those drone pilots who carried out those operations. Fortunately for them, there's more attention to what it means to people, because they're so detached from the battlefield. So, for example, what the French are doing, they're putting their pilots, their Reaper pilots, in the containers in the country they're operating the planes from. So, the French have a base in Niger, in Niamey Air Base, where they fly the Reapers from, and the pilots are based there as well, just to keep close contact with the ground. They can talk with other parts of the military who are in the field carrying out the operations, and to connect people more also with with the civilian population to know what they're doing there. But still, it's difficult to have an opinion. I find it difficult to, at some point I understand the military logic in terms of you always want to make sure your own troops are safe and that the enemy is at the receiving end, and this is like a means to achieve that. So I mean, that makes sense from a military perspective. Like, it doesn't have to be fair. Warfare doesn't have to be fair as long as you win, and as long as you don't do it violating all the Geneva Conventions. That's war. War is messy and never is going to be clean. So also for the drone pilots themselves, you sign up to join the military. That entails that your willingness to kill people. So you have to take responsibility to do that. If you want to push that button and kill someone, you have to live with the consequences. And if that means also staring at a screen and seeing that happening, personally, I don't feel so much sympathy for their trauma in that sense. Like, you choose to do that, so I'm sorry, but you sign up for that, and if you don't like killing people, maybe you shouldn't join the military. Maybe it sounds a bit harsh, but
no, I know what you mean. We all have a choice at the end of the day. Do you know what I mean? We all have the choice. I know exactly what you mean, man. So Wim, I've been following your work very closely, man. I think what you're doing is so good. Like, I really, really enjoy like looking through your reports and seeing what you're tweeting about environment and all of this stuff. Maybe just to kind of finish this off, just explain to the people about some of your other work and what you're up to this year, I guess next year.
Yeah, sure. So this part of the drone work is like the work we're doing, trying to see how technology is shaping warfare. The other part of the work is we're looking at how the war impacts the environment and people, and it's like basically people, when you talk about the environment, people think like what you're doing, like you're separating waste in a war in a war or something. But if you actually travel to those areas, and I know you've been to northeast Syria as well. It's like people are depending on oil. The oil industry was heavily damaged, and now there's all kind of leakages. It's seeping into in the rivers. People have to work in makeshift oil refineries to make a living. The crop fields are being burned in the summer. The waste disposal is lacking. All these kind of communicable diseases are breaking out. But it's hardly on the agenda of humanitarian response. It's not on the agenda so much of when there's a reconstruction phase. And we've been looking at several conflicts, and we're trying to see how can we identify those specific issues linked with environmental health, like how it's affecting the health of people, how it's affecting their livelihoods. And this has been traditionally very difficult because no one was doing this, and it's of course hard to get information from a conflict zone because it's difficult to go there if you don't have nothing, if that's not your business to be there. So we've been also with Bellingcat, we've been using open source information to gather all these kind of bits and pieces of information to understand what's happening. It can be very diverse, from the examples I just mentioned, from oil pollution to, there's been major risk of factories storing chemical waste in Ukraine, which has, if that's being hit, it would contaminate the whole region with chemical waste. Water infrastructure is being damaged, so people don't have access to clean water. Again, taking an example from Syria, where after the Turkish incursion last year in northeast Syria with the Syrian militias, they shut down the water pumping station that's providing clean water to Hasaka city and surrounding villages. So 600,000 people were cut off from clean water. So that's like using water as a weapon, which is very disturbing. In the west of Syria, we're currently we're using satellites to check the changes in the environment and also see how that's affecting people. So there has been massive deforestation in this area. It had hit the news a couple of days ago when there were a lot of fires in the government-controlled area in Latakia. But we've looking at the area, which initially was under rebel control in 2013, when like Syria has like 3% of the land is covered with forest or trees. It used to be actually 20 in the early 19th century. It's all cut down. But now during the war, like 25% of all the remaining forest is being cut down because people need firewood because energy prices are going up. There has been production of charcoal for smuggling to get from armed groups to get money for weapons, but also by criminal groups in the government-controlled area. And there's been like a use of like incendiary weapons to burn down the forest where rebel groups were hiding. And so the question is like, why you care about trees so much in a war? I can understand the question, but like it's for people there living there, it's you have to take into account the climate change angle, and you have to take into account it's also a livelihood issue, and there's also an inherent value in nature and biodiversity for the country. So, and the reason why I mentioned climate change is because trees are necessary to block sunlight or absorb sunlight to prevent the warming of the soil. It serves as a way to deal with carbon dioxide. In that sense, like in the bigger picture, it's important, and it's also like a livelihood issue in many of the areas for people. And so that's like another aspect. So what we're doing there is trying to look all these tools, look up all these kind of different tools, and trying to document that and trying to engage with relevant organizations that they should provide cleanup and remediation of polluted areas, so people can return to the area and rebuild their livelihoods or their community there. And yeah, if you're afraid of drinking the water because it's contaminated because of the war, then it makes it more difficult to start up your life again. Just to give you one example from Syria, but there have been many different kind of issues in Iraq, in Ukraine, and in the South Sudan, Colombia, you name it. There have been legacy issues with Agent Orange in Vietnam, which was it's a defoliant which was used by the US to remove all the it was sprayed over the forests or the jungle to remove all the leaves in the 1970s. So they're using dioxide, and still today, dioxide is a very toxic substance. It easily gets into the groundwater, into the soil, and all these Vietnamese communities were affected by it, and Vietnamese children are being born with massive birth defects, which are directly linked with the use of Agent Orange, and it's still happening today. So these are all kind of elements we're trying to document that, and we're using Twitter, we're using Instagram, Facebook to collect all these stories from people posting pictures from conflict areas. We're using satellites to monitor what's happening. All this satellite imagery is freely available online, which is like a super interesting development. So yeah, if you're keen to follow that more, check out the Twitter account. It's at WAMEZ, at WAMEZZ. Or check our website on Pax for Peace, or check Bellingcat. We're also publishing materials on that. If you have any questions, like happy to help out or explore if you're interested in collaborating with us.
Yeah, man, I just wanted to say as well, like, I really do think the work you're doing is so important, because it really reflects like how people are living in the war zone. It's like, oh, why do you care about the trees, or why do you care about this? Well, no, outside of the bombs and the killing, people do have to get on. When I was in northeast Syria in Rojava last year, went to this co-op. It's like equality female male co-op place where they all do their own farming. And then just over the hill, there's like this huge fucking oil refinery. And, it's the banner picture. I took it on my Twitter. And I said to the girls there, like, wow, like, you got all these like organic crops, but then there's like oil everywhere. And they were like, yeah, like, there's nothing we can really do. Like, the Americans are running that. We can't, we just have to get on with our thing. And I was really thinking about your work at that moment. I just thought, man, like, yeah, this is actually terrible. You know what I mean? Like, it's so ignored, so yeah, man, I don't know, I think what you're doing is great, and definitely suggest people follow you. Sorry, say that again, that Twitter, just spell it out one more time.
Yeah, so it's at WAMEZ, WAMEZZ, it's always good to get people engaged on that. And yeah, I think the example you gave just is really brings the message home, I guess, also. And also, if we talk with our partners and people who live there in northeast Syria, like, most of them actually want to leave because they feel like we can rebuild our future here, because there are a lot of shepherds there, people, farmers who are it doesn't make any sense to invest in farming anymore, because they have like rivers of oil are literally flowing through the landscape, and when there's heavy rains, like, the oil spreads over the acres. If they drill a water well, then it smells bad because the ground is so much contaminated. So people actually want to leave the area and rebuild a future somewhere else, because there's no point in staying. I think that's sort of devastating to hear those kind of stories. But
yeah, totally. It defeats the object of fighting for the land as well. It's like, okay, you've got your land, but you can't live on it afterwards. It's fucked. But yeah, man, definitely. Thank you very much for coming on. Really interesting, man. Speak soon. Good luck with all your work, man.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks for having me.
Cheers, man. That was Wim Zwijnenburg speaking about the rise of deadly drones in warfare. Scary stuff from the future. It's fucked up. You should definitely check out his Twitter, as he mentioned there. He's got a lot of really interesting stuff going on. If you like Popular Front, you'll definitely like what he's doing. Please do consider supporting us on the Patreon. Go to patreon.com/popularfront. You will get bonus episodes, access to the community Discord, early release episodes, access to the Too Cool for J School series, narrated articles. There's all sorts. Ask anyone that's a Patreon. I'm pretty sure they'll tell you get fuckloads for very little. So yeah, patreon.com/popularfront, or if you want to support us another way, go to popularfront.co/support. We survive on the Patreon and donations. We are 100% independent, grassroots, definitely. So yeah, if you want to see us keep moving forward, see us keep making more stuff, go and support us. Also, you can support us by buying our merchandise, www.popularfront.shop. You will find it all there, cool t-shirts, all sorts. If you're a member of the Patreon, you will get discounts on, I can't speak today, on merchandise. This episode is sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue 97239. Tell them Popular Front sent you if you want to get some kind of discount, something nice. Also, the episode is sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. One in South, one in West. Check them out on social media at Grindcore House. Go in, say hello, they're a good bunch. The episode is also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and informing people about historical conflict propaganda. Get prints at propagandopolis.com. That is PROPAG. Fuck my life. 1 second. PROPAGADOPOLIS. It's like, I don't know, propaganda if you're Greek or some shit. I don't fucking know. But yeah, propagandopolis.com, and then enter the code POPULARFRONT10 to get 10% off the posters. They're very cool. Check them out. Also, the episode is sponsored by Black Triangle, an independent company selling self-defense tools. Check them out at blktriangle.com. See them on Instagram and that as well. Just look them up. Black Triangle, good bunch of people. This is not about violence, it's about self-defense. Check them out. Again, check us out on the Patreon, patreon.com/popularfront. You get a lot there. The more we get on the Patreon, the more content we put out, the more stuff we make, the more documentaries, episodes, bonus, all of that. Talking about documentaries, we've got something very, very special coming in November. So if you want to see that, make sure you subscribe to youtube.com/popularfront. Check us out on Instagram at popular.front, Twitter at popularfrontco, or follow me at Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. Thank you to the following higher tier Patreons. They are Michael O'Connor, Hapet, mate, tell me if I say your name wrong. Hapet Yagizayan. Yeah, it's Armenian, right? So Hapet Yagizayan, I think. Let me know if that's wrong, man. Apologies. Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, Alexander, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Bastian Gamillo Ritmeyer, Ian Frois, James Colley, Michael Achakan, Ethan Reyes, Fitz Madrid, Joe Watt, Alex Northrop, Ed Coulthard, Johnny LaFleur, Clayton Taylor, Hugo Newski, Mike Barone, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Jojo Arani, D.R., Trey Nance, Charlie, Amy Rupert, Rubicon, Mink, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Christina Ravetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Moody Al-Rashid, Maxwell Burke, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Ari from the Discord, Young Wasabi, Sarushe Hawazi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, Scatoon Music, Sebastian from Discord, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarik, Patrick Bronte, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, where am I? Diana Gorvinek, Q-Ball, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Emily Molly, Axel Iverson from Iceland, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandicott, Moritz Zumwall, Kay Hardy Roberts and Joanne Stocker. Thank you all so much. Again, if you want to support us, go to patreon.com/popularfront. It all helps. The intro music is by Home and the outro is by Sam Black. Find his music at samblackpf.com.